Going into the final saga of One Piece, if you asked me who the biggest wild card left in the series is, my answer would undoubtedly be Kuzan. To be a character that formerly possesses the rank of an admiral, then joining the crew of a Yonko, someone who's potentially the last villain in the story, and even crazier, to be included in one of the most telling panels in the entire story to date. There is a lot to talk about with Kuzan because there is a ton of open paths that Oda could take with his character. And that is why today we're going to be taking a deep look into Kuzan's character, what he was, what he is, and what he will be. I think there are a ton of things about this character that people are missing. Yes, of course, there's also a lot that people are expecting from him that all One Piece fans can agree on, but I think he still is the most unique character in the entire story, so let's talk about him. From his introduction back before the Water 7 arc, I think it was honestly pretty difficult to tell that Kuzan was an original and unique character amongst the ranks of admirals and high-ranking marine officers, because he was the first admiral we came across. We had no foundation or knowledge about what this role was supposed to entail, and we had no idea how unique he was compared to the rest of the characters who possessed that title. But that changed pretty quickly as we got into Robin's backstory in Enies Lobby. It immediately becomes clear that Kuzan is an extremely conflicted character, wanting to do what he's supposed to do as an admiral and fulfill the justice that he looked up to in the Navy, while also harboring this large discontent with the direction the world was heading, the things that the Navy was doing in his presence, and the action of his peers like Sakazuki. At the time we really didn't know it, but this laid the groundwork for his entire character. And of course, what I mean by that is that this backstory laid the groundwork for Akainu versus Aokiji fighting for the position of Fleet Admiral, which would then cause Kuzan to leave the Navy and eventually go and join the Blackbeard pirates. Now, I know I skipped ahead quite a bit because there was all of Marineford and a lot of actions that Kuzan had in that war, but I actually think a lot of his actions during that war were just fighting-centric, whereas this video is going to focus more on his character and where we're headed in the future, so we're going to skip over Marineford. But before we get to Kuzan joining the Blackbeard pirates, there's actually a very important moment at the end of Punk Hazard that once again puts this inner conflict in his character on display. At this point, Kuzan has left the Navy. He has deemed that the Navy under Akainu's direction is something he does not want to represent, and after his loss at Punk Hazard, he leaves. However, we see him come to protect Smoker as Doflamingo is about to kill him, and this would again be very telling about Kuzan's inner conflict as it tells us exactly where he lies, the same as it did in Robin's backstory. The biggest thing about this mini conflict here at the end of Punk Hazard is that it's Smoker, one of the previously established good Marines by Oda, who has a very just moral system and has constantly questioned the direction of the world, similar to Kuzan. Having these two characters interact here is extremely deliberate for Kuzan's character. It shows us that Kuzan still wants to stand for that justice that he attempted to fight for in trying to gain the Fleet Admiral position, but because the Navy and the world is heading in a different direction, he decides to leave. But when he sees someone who's fighting for the same ideals and still trying to work up the ranks similar to what he was doing in Smoker, he still has that empathy and drive to go save them from being killed by Doflamingo. Once again, Oda is constantly hammering in this inner conflict of Kuzan wanting to do what's right, but not having the power to do so, and instead turning towards greater forces like the Blackbeard pirates. Which gets us to Kuzan joining the Blackbeard pirates, which complicates his character even more. I think when this happened in the story, I saw a lot of One Piece fans misconstrue this action as villainy, considering Blackbeard is obviously a very evil character, and it made people think that Kuzan's inner conflict was not as just as we once thought. Maybe he doesn't want what's best for the world. While I can understand that sentiment, I would totally have to disagree with this. I think it is very easy to say that Kuzan might be more of a villain than we thought if he's joining the Blackbeard pirates, but what's important is the reason why he joins the Blackbeard pirates, or at least what convinces him to do so. Which of course is Blackbeard telling him that his crew is made up of people with their own individual goals, just banding together to make those goals easier for each other. If Kuzan was joining the Blackbeard pirates because he believed in Blackbeard's goal and wanted to support his captain, that is an entirely different story, and I would agree that that would make Kuzan a pretty evil character. But it's very obvious that Kuzan is still dealing with this inner conflict that we've talked about in this video, and in order to resolve that inner conflict and get what he wants, he's willing to join a crew like the Blackbeard Pirates because he thinks it'll act as a good vehicle to achieve his goals. So again, I don't think Kuzan is this evil character who's supporting Blackbeard. I truly do think he's just hitching a ride to his main goals, and the reason Blackbeard is that vehicle is because Blackbeard is a very cunning man who's constantly advancing to the top of the world, so it's honestly a pretty smart move by Kuzan. But what are the goals that Kuzan is after? Why go ahead and join a Yonko after previously being an admiral to achieve some grand goal that we don't even know about? Well, before we talk about those goals, I want to talk about the impact that Kuzan will have on Blackbeard's crew in the future. And we can actually find this out by looking at what's currently happening in the One Piece manga, because there's a very clear parallel to Blackbeard that existed in the past: the Rocks Pirates. We've of course just learned that Rocks is Blackbeard's father, and that their crews actually very heavily mirror each other, as well as their goals to take over the world. So if there is somebody that mirrors Kuzan in the Rocks crew, we can use how that crew played out in order to determine what will happen with Kuzan and the Blackbeard Pirates. And now I want you to stay with me here, but I think the person in the Rocks pirate crew that mirrors the role that Kuzan's going to play for the Blackbeard crew is Whitebeard. Now, no, I'm not saying Kuzan and Whitebeard played similar roles in their respective eras. Whitebeard would obviously go on to become this legendary figure, and although I think Kuzan is going to have a major role in the final war, I'm not saying he's like the Whitebeard of this era. However, I do think he's the Whitebeard of Blackbeard's crew when talking about the Rocks Pirates in comparison. Whitebeard was a man of insane power, yet for some reason chose to subdue himself to the rule of Rocks, and went along with Rocks' plans in order to achieve his own goals. I think the exact same could be said for Kuzan, a man of insane power, comparable to his own captain, allowing himself to sort of hitch a ride in a way with his captain's goals in order to reach the goals that he wants to achieve. I feel like Whitebeard and Kuzan are both the same with Rocks and Blackbeard. Which brings me to then what I think Kuzan's going to do to the Blackbeard Pirates, being the exact same thing that Whitebeard did to the Rocks Pirates. I think there's a lot of evidence that suggests Whitebeard betrayed the Rocks Pirates on God Valley, becoming a major reason why they lost that conflict, because he heavily disagreed with what Rocks was after, and wanted to pursue his own goals. I think the exact same thing's going to happen with Kuzan and the Blackbeard Pirates. Think about what I said earlier in this video. I don't think Kuzan is an evil character at all, and he has this inner moral conflict that he's trying to figure out. I think it's very clear, to me at least, that Kuzan's sense of justice is still morally correct, and when he finds out that he shouldn't be with the Blackbeard Pirates, and that he doesn't agree with the goals that they're trying to fulfill, I think he'll betray the Blackbeard Pirates, just like Whitebeard betrayed Rocks, and would be a major reason why Blackbeard probably loses in the final war during this gigantic conflict. So now we've set the stage. Kuzan has this inner moral conflict that he's trying to figure out. In order to try and figure that out and get to his goals, he's with the Blackbeard Pirates. Once he realizes what his true goals are, he's going to betray the Blackbeard Pirates because he realizes what they're doing is wrong. But we're still missing a piece. What are these goals? What is it that Kuzan wants? What is the result of this moral conflict inside of him going to be? Although there are tons of moments in One Piece that you can use to figure out what these goals are, to me it all tracks back to the Ohara incident, a moment that formed the future conflicts in One Piece still to this day. I think Kuzan's involvement in this incident really shaped what he wants the world to be, a world that is fair towards everybody. The Ohara incident is where Kuzan realized he couldn't just enforce the laws that were created by the people above him, because those laws were unjust and cruel towards normal civilians like the Oharan civilians. Kuzan wants fairness. He wants to be someone who enforces the law, which is why he was in the Navy in the first place, but he wants those laws to be fair, not laws that would allow the genocide of an entire island of people. And I think this is exactly why he's hitching a ride with Blackbeard, because we know Blackbeard wants to become the king of a nation, and potentially even the king of the world like his father Rocks. So if Kuzan can become this fair enforcer of fair rules when Blackbeard is in the driver's seat, he would get exactly what he wants. And building on top of that, I also think that's exactly why he's going to betray Blackbeard, not only because he realizes that Blackbeard will put unfair rules into position as the king of the world, but also because Blackbeard won't be the king of the world. I think Kuzan will eventually realize that Blackbeard is going to lose to Luffy, that Luffy is the true liberator of the world, and that Luffy's morals align even better with Kuzan's, so there'll be a connection there for Kuzan to get that fair world that he wants under Luffy instead. This all ties back into Kuzan's love for Garp as well. Not only is Garp the grandfather of the one that Kuzan will end up realizing is going to liberate the world, Luffy, Kuzan's ideals are extremely formed by Garp's sense of true justice, which is exactly why I truly believe that Kuzan wants a fair system that is fair for everyone, the exact same that Garp wants. And in the very end of the story, I could totally see Kuzan taking up the role of being a new Navy officer in the world that Luffy establishes is free. Oda has of course been building up all of these quote-unquote new Navy members like Kobe, Helmeppo, Smoker, Fujitora, and Kuzan to be a just, correct force to be established in the new world that Luffy creates when he liberates the world. And I think Kuzan will very possibly be the head of that force after realizing what he wants will be achieved under Luffy's liberation of the world. Thank you so much for watching. I really like Kuzan's character. I think it's one of the most interesting in all of One Piece because his ideals really sink deep into the story, and you really have to dig through a lot of his moments to figure out what he truly wants. And I think because those ideals are so complex and hidden, when they do finally come to the forefront of the story, it'll be one of the most satisfying character conclusions in the entire story of One Piece. If you enjoyed this video, I'd really appreciate it if you can like and subscribe. Thank you for watching, and until next time.